Is legumi like gitchigumi?
Maybe. I don't know. Gumi is not necessarily something I walk around thinking about frequently.
Probably a good thing.
I didn't even know it was a thing.
Well, let's talk about the history. The Myrtles Plantation was founded in 1796 by General David Bradford, who named it Laurel Grove. And he lived there alone for several years until President John Adams pardoned him for his role in the Pennsylvania Whiskey Rebellion.
1796 was a leap year.
Awesome. I had no clue until you told me.
Thought that I don't know. I just felt that it might be.
And Krysta, have you heard of the Whiskey Rebellion?
Whiskey Rebellion sounds like some group who goes to a bar and drinks whiskey all night. I don't know.
It was a 1794 uprising of farmers and distillers in western Pennsylvania to protest in protest of the whiskey tax enacted by the federal government. Following years of aggression with tax collectors, the region finally exploded in a confrontation that resulted in President Washington sending troops to quell what some feared would become a full-blown revolution. Bradford was part of that, and because of that, he was sent into exile. So he went to Bayou Sara, which was then a Spanish colony.
Okay. So did that happen there in that same...
No, that happened in Pennsylvania.
Okay, that's where I was a little confused, because I'm like, but he didn't found the plantation until 1796, and the Whiskey Rebellion happened in 1794. So this was his next step.
Right. He was part of the Whiskey Rebellion. He fought against the federal government. The federal government was so disheartened by this, they sent him into exile. So he went to Bayou Sara in Louisiana. Bayou Sara was at that point a Spanish colony, and he bought something like 600 acres from them.
Cool.
Yeah, and that he named Laurel Grove. Now, he lived there for several years until John Adams lifted his exile, President Adams.
Oh, that's cool.
And so, but he had bought the land from Baron de Carondelet, which is funny to me because around here, especially in St. Louis, one of the big healthcare systems is Carondelet. So, in 1820, he wound up selling the Myrtles to his son-in-law, Judge Clark Woodruff, who remodeled the mansion extensively.
Wow. But it was still called the Laurels.
It was still at that point called the Laurels Plantation, okay. Yes. It didn't get called the Myrtles until some years later when it was bought by Mr. Sterling Ruffin, or Mr. Ruffin Sterling. Sorry, I had that name exactly backwards. Who completed the mansion in the grandeur that one can see today. The 125-foot-long veranda is noted for its ornamental ironwork. The entrance foyer contains some of the finest examples of, now I want to make sure I get this right, Faubois, and open pierced friezwork in existence today. The French chandelier is Baccarat crystal and weighs more than 300 pounds. Good thing Louisiana does not have earthquakes.
Yeah, that could be bad. Or tornadoes.
Or tornadoes, yeah. The stained glass entrance original to the house was hand-painted, etched, and patterned after the French cross to ward off evil. The ladies' and gentlemen's parlors are mirrored reflections of one another. These two rooms are identical in size and exhibit magnificent open pierced friezwork molding. The Carrara marble mantels grace the north and south walls of the parlors. The dining and gambling rooms, important to plantation life, are downstairs. The former provided a place to hold festive dinners and discuss events of the day. The latter offered a restful and intimate setting for one to gamble and play games of chance.
I think.
So, yeah. Now, Clark, between Ruff and Sterling and Balder was his son-in-law, Clark Woodruff. Now, Clark was a judge, and actually he founded a school at the plantation as well for a short while. He was born in Litchfield County, Connecticut, in August 1791. He had no desire to follow in his father's footsteps as a farmer. He left Connecticut at the age of 19, and sought his fortune on the Mississippi River, ending up in Bayou Sara. He arrived in 1810, the same year the citizens of the Feliciana Paris rose up in revolt against the Spanish garrison at Baton Rouge. They overthrew the Spanish and then set up a new territory, with the capital being at St. Francisville, which later was absorbed into New Orleans. So, still seeking to make his fortune, Woodruff placed an advertisement in the St. Francisville newspaper, the Timepiece, in the summer of 1811. He informed the public that an academy would be opening on the first Monday in September for the reception of students. He planned to offer English grammar, astronomy, geography, education, composition, penmanship, and Greek and Latin. The academy was apparently short-lived. In 1814, he joined Colonel Hyde's cavalry regiment from the Feliciana Paris to fight alongside Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans, when the War of 1812 had ended, which technically the Battle of New Orleans took place after the War of 1812 had ended. That's one of my favorite little footnotes of history. The War of 1812, if you talk to the British, they'll tell you they won it. And the Americans will tell you they won it. Because here's what happened. They negotiated a ceasefire. They negotiated a treaty to end the war. But in the 1800s, news didn't travel so fast. The fastest it could travel was by ship.
Right. Absolutely. Because it's not like you could just send a note.
Right.
Email was not a thing.
Email wasn't a thing. So it just didn't travel fast. So the war was over when the Battle of New Orleans happened. But from an American's perspective, there was the Battle of New Orleans, which the British got routed. They got routed hard. And then the war was over. So from the Americans' perspective, we beat them so badly, the British gave up. From the British perspective, the war was over and we attacked them after the war. We're jerks. So both sides felt really good about the end of that war.
Well, you know.
So that's the way that happened. Now, he began his studies with Judge David Bradford and soon earned his degree. He also succumbed to the charms of the Bradford daughter, the lovely Sarah Matilda. Their romance blossomed under the shade of the crepe myrtle trees, which is why the Myrtles gets its name. It's the crepe myrtle trees. Or as they like to call them, the Myrtles.
Myrtle
the turtle. You keep bringing it up. I don't know what to tell you. After the death of David Bradford, Woodford managed Laurel Grove for his mother-in-law, Elizabeth. He expanded the holdings of the plantation and planted about 650 acres of indigo and cotton. Together, he and Sarah Matilda had 3 children, Cornella Gale, James, and Mary Octavia. Tragically, their happiness would not last. On July 21st, 1823, Sarah Matilda died after contracting yellow fever. The disease spread through a number, it was part of a number of epidemics that swept through the area in those days. Hardly a family in the region went untouched by tragedy and despair. Although heartbroken, Woodruff continued to manage the plantation and care for his children with help from Elizabeth. But the dark days were not over. On July 15th, 1824, his only son, James, also died from yellow fever. And 2 months later, in September, Cornella Gale was also felled by the disease.
Oh, goodness gracious.
So it was a rough time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Woodruff's life would never be the same, but he managed to purchase the farm outright from his mother-in-law. She was quite elderly by this time and was happy to see the place in good hands. She continued to live at Laurel Grove with her son-in-law and granddaughter, Octavia, until her death in 1830.
Oh, that's nice.
By this time, Woodruff was living on Rampart Street in New Orleans and had changed the spelling of his last name from Woodruff with 2 O's and 2 F's to Woodruff with a U and 2 F's.
Well, whatever works, I guess.
He has also been elected as the president of public works for the city. During this period, Octavia was sent to a finishing school in New Haven, Connecticut, but she returned home to live with her father in 1836. 2 years later, she married Colonel Lorenzo Auguste Besançon and moved to his plantation,
He's French.
Oak Lawn, 5 miles north of New Orleans. In 1840, the Louisiana governor, Isaac Johnson, appointed Woodruff to the newly created office of Auditor of Public Works. He served for 1 term. Then, at 60 years of age, he retired and moved to Oak Lawn to live with Octavia and her husband. He devoted the remainder of his life to the study of chemistry and physics and died on November 25th, 1851. He was buried in the Girard Street Cemetery in New Orleans.
Very nice.
And it was after this point that Ruffin Sterling, also known as Ruffin Gray Sterling, purchased the plantation and renamed it the Myrtles.
Gotcha. So...
The Sterlings were a wealthy family who owned several plantations on both sides of the Mississippi River.
Cool.
I thought so.
Yep. That sounds like a lot of work.
At the time, it would certainly have been, and I mean, it's going to come up later, so we might as well point out that they got a lot of that work done because they housed slaves and lots and lots of them.
Yes, yes.
I fully agree with you, Krysta. It was wrong.
Of course, that was before the Civil War, and that's why the Civil War was fought, and so many people.
Nobody should ever go through a life. Nobody should ever go through a lifetime of abuse or slavery. So if you are experiencing abuse, and I know it's illegal, but some people unfortunately still do it, even if it is illegal, or slavery, I would recommend, in the best way possible, trying to go get help. I don't care what your gender is. I don't care who you are. You need to get help. You need to get someone to help you out with this situation.
Yes, never good to stay in an abusive situation ever.
Now, as I said earlier, once Ruffin purchased the place, they immediately set about remodeling it. And so a lot of its modern look is, we owe that to the Sterlings.
Right. And this was like, we're looking at like 35 years after it was initially built, right?
Yep. About 35 years after it was initially built, and the Sterlings had money and wanted to show it off.
Well, all right, then.
4 years after the completion of all the upgrades and actually changing the name of the plantation to the Myrtles, Sterling died on July 17, 1854, of consumption, as tuberculosis was called at that time. He left his vast holdings in the care of his wife, Mary Cobb, who most referred to as a remarkable woman. Many other plantation owners stated rather patronizingly, from a 21st century point of view, that she had the business acumen of a man. which was high praise for a woman in those days. And she managed to run all of her farms almost single-handedly.